Judd Hendricks, and I want to welcome you to our Wednesday afternoon program, Boardroom Buddhas. This has been one of our most exciting programs that we've been doing this summer, and I'm really excited about the idea and the vision behind Boardroom Buddhas. It's how do we raise consciousness in the corporate world? How do we invite leaders to join in creating a more awake and engaged and compassionate city? And so I've been so excited about the topics. Last week we started with a kind of the broad theme of leaders as healers. And today we've got a really incredible panel of people, friends, and very awake people on the question of, can lawyers be healers? So I want to thank, we'll introduce our panelists here in a moment, but I want to thank Ida and Sarah, who have been the organizers of Boardroom Buddhas, and I'm going to turn it over to Ida. I do want to mention, if you're joining us on Facebook Live, you're welcome to add a comment in the comment chat box, and we'll include that. And those of you that are joining us on Zoom, which is a great group, I'll invite you to unmute yourself and ask your questions at the appropriate time and engage in the conversation. So Ida, take it away. Thanks for pulling all this together.
Absolutely. Thank you, Judd. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Boardroom Buddhas. Every Wednesday at 3 p.m. for now. Until that changes, we'll let you know. But if your schedule allows, plug in. If it does not, we tend to take this recorded conversation and we share it on social media a couple of days later too. So there's always that opportunity. So what is Boardroom Buddhas? The Boardroom Buddha series is a carved out space on IPP's platform of virtual conversations. Like Judd mentioned, it is in an effort to raise corporate consciousness by cultivating the effeminate wisdom in workspaces. We do this by talking to and about thought leadership. And I looked up that word again today just because I needed the reminder. A thought leader is someone who, based on their expertise and perspective in a specific industry, offers a unique guidance, inspires innovation, and influences others. So, along with my co-host, Sarah Waski, got it right this time? Say hi, Sarah. We are asking the question, as Judd said, can lawyers become healers? Our panelists today all answered yes to this question, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce them to you. So Tom Williams wrote and shared an article with the Boardroom Buddha team a few weeks ago with the same title as this conversation, Can Lawyers Become Healers? And of course, we were so intrigued that we started conversations with Tom, who then introduced us to Jeannie, our other panelists, and of course, Ayana joined in this past week, and we're super excited about that. Tom is a defense attorney in the practice of employment law with a mid-sized law firm here in Louisville, Kentucky. Jeannie Bishop is a multi-published author and public defender in the Cook County Public Defender's Office in Chicago, Illinois. And lastly, and very, very importantly, because she represents the future of law, we welcome JD candidate Ayana Gotso, who is currently interning at a mid-sized law firm here in Louisville, Kentucky. So we're super, super, super excited to have our panelists here today. We're going to do it a little differently. I'm going to ask each one of them to jump on and say hi and tell us a little bit about their purpose-driven why, specifically to this topic. So Tom, do you want to grab the mic? And
yeah, sure. Thanks, Ida. It's nice to have so many familiar faces in my little box that I'm looking at. You know, for me, I've been practicing, it'll be 30 years that I've been practicing in September, and it probably wasn't until I learned about restorative justice in 2007, and I'd been practicing like 17, 18 years, that I even had the idea that lawyers could create conditions where healing could happen. And it was when I first learned about restorative justice And I was a little miffed that I'd been practicing that long and had a legal education, and no one had really even introduced the idea. So I won't take up too much time for my intro, but last year I was asked by the Kentucky Bar Association, they wanted an article on civility, and I said, well, why don't we do something different? We always write about civility. Why don't we, ask this question, what if lawyers saw themselves as healers? And I wrote the article, and then they told me that it didn't fit. I thought it might be a little challenging for a lot of practicing attorneys, and I essentially got the reject for it. But then, the pandemic happened, and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and everything else in the world. And it seems like now is really a good time to ask this question. I don't have a lot of answers in this area. I have experiences and I have imagination. And I think, what the world needs now is more imagination. And I've had experiences of healing, and I've seen healing, accomplished through the legal process. And I have a kind of a deep-seated belief that that it's those kind of points where people are wounded is kind of where their glory is. So it's where we're broken that the healing can happen. And I do know that people in the law deal on a regular basis with people who are broken. And I think maybe with that, I'll turn it over to Jeannie Bishop, because Jeannie, she started at a large law firm, and then she became a public defender, and she just had a horrible tragedy in her life where her sister was murdered. And Jeannie went through a reconciliation process, as she wrote about in a book, and she's recently published an absolutely beautiful book on reconciliation between the father of Timothy McVeigh and the father of one of the victims of the Oklahoma City bombing. Jeannie grew up, she's in Chicago now, but she grew up and that was her hometown. So I think she's experienced healing both on a personal basis and on a facilitated basis. And then I'll do a little Ayana introduction before Jeannie gets to talk, because Jeannie and Ayana just met. I was really hopeful the two of them could meet, so now this has happened. But Ayana is clerks at my law firm, Stolkeen and Ogden, and when she heard about this program, she reached out and we had a wonderful conversation. And she said, I'm going to law school and I've had this idea about lawyers being healers. I didn't know it was a thing. And I said, well, actually, it's a thing between three of us, as far as I know. So she has a lot of wonderful ideas, and I'm glad she's able to be on the call, but I'll turn it over to Jeannie at this point. You're muted, Jeannie. Oh, yeah.
There you go. Tom, thanks so much. My why of coming to this is, as you said, the tragedy that happened in my family. My younger sister, Nancy, was murdered along with her husband, Richard. And to compound the tragedy, Nancy was 2 months pregnant with what would have been their first baby when they were shot to death in their home by a teenager. And at the time of the murders, I was a corporate associate at a big law firm, and I had been trained in
Jeannie, you got muted there again.
I got muted again. Sorry, here I am. All right. I was trained in law school that, you're, as a lawyer, you fight for your client. It's this fight, and your job is to win for your client. And so it was kind of set up like a battle and a war. And when Nancy's murderer was arrested 6 months after the crime, it turned out to be a 16-year-old boy who lived only a few blocks away from her. He went to the same high school and lives in the same neighborhood as my 16-year-old son right now. And so it was a child that had killed them. And he was sentenced to the mandatory sentence in Illinois that you got at the time of life in prison without the possibility of parole, meaning you go to prison and you die there. There's never any second look at you, no matter how rehabilitated or remorseful you may be. And so the first book I wrote is called Change of Heart, and it's about my change of heart from going from this person who saw the law and punishment as, this harsh, battle to see who would win, to trying to reach across the divide, trying to not throw people away, but restore them, to bring them back, to sit down and understand them as human beings and work out a more healing, more merciful, and ultimately more just resolution.
That's beautiful. Tom, are you going to speak a little bit more, or shall we throw it open to Miss Ayana?
Yeah, Ayana, would you like to say a few things?
Yeah, for sure. This is something that's definitely new to me. So I went to law school thinking that I could help change society and make it a better place. And I think going through, I'm a rising 2L, so this is I'm going into my second year of law school. Going through the initial, my first year of law school, I was kind of disillusioned with the legal system and how it works, and kind of my ability to be able to create change in the way that I once thought I could, using the law as a tool. And so I've been on a spiritual journey for about, very seriously, for about over a year now. And once the pandemic hit, I think like everyone else, I was really stressed out just about everything, on top of, continued violence and genocide against Black people. And was just feeling a lot of pain. And I happened upon A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. My mom actually just randomly ordered it. And so I spent 2 days reading through it and, kind of furthering my spiritual path, and, realized that those who are enlightened about the spiritual journey, should help others achieve that enlightenment and that form of spiritual healing. And so I started to think, I want to be a healer. I want to help in healing others. How can I do that in the legal profession as well? And so, I kind of brainstormed for a bit, but, I was, like Tom said, I was thinking, I don't know if this is a thing. I've never heard of lawyers being healers. I've never heard of, our jobs being looked at as helping heal people and helping move people forward in life, in that healing way. And then I started an internship, and we had a diversity and inclusion seminar, and Tom was there, and he told about this talk, and I almost couldn't believe it. I was a little bit astounded that something that I had been thinking about just a month or so prior was now placed right in front of me, and so that's kind of how I ended up here today. And had that conversation with Tom where we discussed lawyers as healers. And so yeah, I'm really, really grateful to be here, and really excited that everyone is in on this conversation and is, looking at this as a possibility in the future for the legal profession.
Great, thanks, Ayana. Yeah, and maybe just a little background on what the kind of genesis of the article. When I first learned about restorative justice, I saw a victim, what's called a victim offender mediation, and a woman had been, her father had been murdered by a next door neighbor who was psychotic, and she was severely injured but recovered from it. And it's really a beautiful video because she talks about herself and talks about how that trauma really was the lens through which she saw her whole life. She said literally people would complain about something, and she would think to herself, well, your father wasn't murdered in your presence. And then she heard about this opportunity for a victim offender mediation where she could meet with the person who had caused this tremendous harm in her life. And when she ended up ultimately meeting him, she had a lot of expectations about what would happen, but ultimately what happened was she released the pain that she had been carrying, and she was freed. I mean, if you watch the video, kind of this joy in this woman just really radiates. And I remember thinking it was voluntary on her part. It was voluntary on his part. It was incredibly healing for her. Why don't we do this? Why, what's the problem? Why, this seems awful easy. Why don't we do it? And, that was kind of the beginning of my restorative justice journey. And I tell people it's often like, I compare it to the Shawshank Redemption when he was getting out of prison, and he took a spoonful of dust each day, and then wormed his way out. I mean, moving the legal system is challenging. Moving any system is challenging, but I think we would all agree that we have a moment right now where things are moving. And now is a great opportunity. But the particular article was actually written in terms of systemic violence. Our local jailer, a retired jailer, a gentleman named Mark Bolton, would tell this great story, I think a true story, of a woman mother who lived in town, who had a job at a fast food restaurant and had her life in order. And she got pulled over for a traffic ticket, and one thing led to another, and she missed the court date, and a bench warrant was issued. And then as a result of the bench warrant, when she was picked up, she was put in jail. And then as a result of that, she lost her job. And then as a result of that, she lost her child. So we had just absolute violence that was not intentionally perpetrated by our system against this woman who was living in a very fragile place. And, and it got me to thinking that, juxtaposing it to some of the beautiful restorative justice stories we've had, where literally people have been reintegrated into their communities and relationships have been built instead of communities being divided. And it seemed to me that the legal system should have, any kind of mechanical system has safety valves when there's too much pressure, a place to release the steam so unintended consequences don't happen. And so I kind of asked the question, why wouldn't we have kind of restorative justice safety guard within the system so we never get a result of somebody losing everything because of a traffic ticket? I mean, that's just, nobody would think that's justice. It's just that the system can grind up people on its own. So that led me to the question of what if lawyers are healers. The first time I thought about it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I'll be honest, I Googled it, and the only thing I found was an alternative healer in California who was also a lawyer. So I think we're really kind of at the cutting edge of something around imagination. And again, I am a lawyer, and I work within systems, and I understand about accountability, and I understand about a lawyer's obligation to represent their client. And I also know that as a lawyer, you can ask bigger questions, and you can help clients see bigger issues, and you can use violence in your words that is going to create and perpetrate more violence. And I really feel a calling to empower attorneys to take on new roles. I mean, as Jeannie mentioned, and Jeannie, I can kick it over to you after this, but as she mentioned, I mean, law school often teaches trial by battle, and they teach this notion that everything is a verbal debate and you don't have anything but competitive relationships, and that somehow this sort of system creates absolutely the results we want. And I don't think very many people think that really works anymore, and that we need to empower ourselves to see the world differently.
Right, exactly. And, it was so interesting. I, years ago, read Gandhi's autobiography, and it wasn't about the period in his life that you see in the film about his life, about his activism for human rights and ultimately independence in India. It's when he was in South Africa as a young lawyer, and he found that he was so good at winning at that battle thing that what would happen is his client would crush the opponent, and the opponent would walk away angry, and then there'd be bitterness among these families and among the community. And after a while, he decided, I'm not going to do this, winning, crushing thing anymore. I'm only going to take cases where people want to resolve this amicably. I'm going to help negotiate that. So that there's this larger goal of, when you walk away from this, are we more healed? Are we more whole as a community? Are our relationships restored instead of frayed and broken? I find in my public defender practice that we do this when we have this conference under Illinois Supreme Court Rule 402, where the judge and the prosecutor and me, the defense lawyer, can sit down with the permission of the defendant and the permission of the victims to just talk about what's fair here, what's just, what are the issues here, what do we think should happen, instead of having everything be this all out battle. That's one of the ways that I think that lawyers can be healers, to bring people together into conversation and find a solution that everyone can agree with. And I know that, Tom, you're doing that in Louisville with your juvenile offenders.
Yeah, and I'm wondering what your experience is like at law school so far. Have you seen the full spectrum of professors, and what's how do your colleagues approach the law?
I think it's the same experiences both of you have had. Very much, there can only be one winner. It's adversarial, and I think that's the way that law school has always been. And my hope is that it won't continue to be that way, but as of right now, it's essentially just that. And that's why I was so disillusioned after my first year of law school, and having a better understanding of the legal system and how it works, and how it works so often against the people that need it the most. And so, that's what kind of brought me to thinking alternatively about how we as lawyers and as law students and as advocates in general, how we can do better for everyone in our communities, and how we can ensure that there's actual healing being done, and that there's more than one winner in the end of everything. So it's kind of my experience with law school.
And Ida, I wonder, and Ida, I wonder how this fits in with, when I hear this discussion, I hear the intro of feminine wisdom, and I appreciated your excitement for the topic. And as a non-lawyer, I'm wondering if you and Sarah have some questions for us.
I was so impressed by your article. By the third time around, I grabbed a pen and sort of made notes and circles and little stars that really spoke powerfully. And one of those words were restorative justice, right? And so because I'm not in that world, the term isn't in my everyday.
Okay.
If we get to hear the same thing over and over, we stop thinking about it. So when I read the article, it really jumped out at me, and I sat with this question and thought, what does that look like in the day-to-day for an attorney, right? I mean, it's nice to have this idea of how it ought to be and be idealistic about it, but in real terms, practical application, what might this look like? And it wasn't a question I was hoping to find my own answer to. It just came up. And so it's so coincidental that literally within days, I caught this news piece on ABC News that spoke about a judge in Ohio. It was a feature they did on him. And he made headlines because of his unusual punishments. that he that he gave out in lieu of prison time. So he would give the defendant an opportunity to choose. So they had one young lady who jumped in a cab, 30 miles later, jumped out without paying the cab driver, right? So he said to her, well, you could spend 30 days in jail, or you can walk for 30 miles. You pick. And of course, she chose walking for 30 miles with this camera following her around, right? And they interviewed her afterwards, and she was like, I'm just so glad I didn't get to go to jail. I was so afraid. I would have walked like 60 miles, right? And then there was another case where a young gentleman, I think he was 17, had stolen a bicycle out of someone's garage. And the judge said to him, well, you either do 90 days in jail or you ride a bike in the upcoming town fair. And he had to trim the bike, get on the bike with a banner, and ride in the fair. So that answered my question in terms of practicality. How do we apply where we act this whole restorative justice ideal? What does that look like when you envision it?
Well, and I can speak to restorative justice. It is a process that's being shepherded by Volunteers of America now for all of Kentucky. There was a 501c3 called Restorative Justice Louisville. But the idea of restorative justice, you know, our Western concept of justice is that if you commit a crime, it's against this abstract state, and it's the state's obligation to basically label you as an offender and ostracize you from the community, essentially, warehouse you somewhere else. The idea of restorative justice is that crime is a violation of relationships, and we have to figure out a way to get the individual back in right relation with the community. So instead of the state's obligation to punish, it's the individual's obligation to be accountable and set things straight and do things right. And like I mentioned, we've very practically had some really beautiful cases. Like, there's just way too many for me to talk about. I'll think of maybe one. Well, the very first one we had, there was a woman named Maria, who's since passed, and she's kind of our Rosa Parks for restorative justice in Louisville. But she had her purse stolen. And I always tear up, so forgive me. But Maria had her purse stolen, and she had her Christmas money in there, and she had pictures of her children, some of which had been deceased. Maria had like 50 kids and grandkids and great-grandkids. And the young man who took the purse, it was at a restaurant, you know, basically just saw it and just grabbed it. And so the way restorative justice conferences work is it's not an individual that goes and sees some kind of representative of the state in a black robe. You sit down and see the people you harmed. So it's really very valuable to see that we all have power to cause harm, but we also have power to make things right. And so in this particular case, the young man came with his mother, and when his mother saw who the victim was, she just started to bawl because, you know, she didn't see her son that way. He wasn't one that was going to hurt someone else in that kind of manner. And, you know, that really illustrated for me the family shame associated with offending. And really the current system doesn't have any way to deal with the family shame. But the long and short of it was the case was facilitated, and, you know, the young man agreed to do some volunteer work with Reverend Porter in the West End, and he, you know, did some restitution. And then the grandma called a final conference after he completed, I think I'm tired from all of this, after he completed the service, and Maria said, now you have another grandma. You know, the mom was proud, the young man was proud. And my pitch is, you know, any of us who are quote unquote successful in life are resilient. We've all fallen. If anybody gives you the indication they have not fallen, they're lying. The key is learning how to get back up. And this is a very simple way to do it. And restorative justice sounds fancy, but really it's just like mom's justice is what I say. I mean, it's just kind of like good parenting. And And it's a shift from seeing the law as some kind of abstraction to seeing the law is something that governs relationships. And that's, you know, obviously a very feminine thing, that kind of everything is relational. And as lawyers start to view themselves as healers, they have to see that, you know, how am I doing what needs to be done, holding people accountable, potentially, if they need to be held accountable, but doing it in a way that they can reintegrate them back into the community. It's not about isolating and ostracizing people. I have a big frustration with people's notion of justice as you label somebody and ostracize. And that's kind of the air we breathe in our society now, is if someone makes a mistake, whatever form of mistake it is, it kind of justifies this notion of scapegoating that goes on. And I think really restorative justice, or a healing kind of justice, is about allowing everyone, you know, everyone belongs, everyone has a place, and those who have done things to hurt their place need to be given a pathway to reintegrate themselves, to hold themselves accountable, so they can be back part of the community.
I would love to chime in on,
yes,
on this, because Ida, the story you told about that judge, and Tom, the story you just told about how that case of Maria's purse, where it was resolved, is what strikes me about that is the creativity of it. A woman who founded a restorative justice office in New York said that our old system of the law is kind of like going to a restaurant and opening up the menu and seeing that the only thing you can order for lunch is a hamburger. And restorative justice allows you to open up that menu and see, I can have a salad, I can, you know, I have choices. There's other things I can do besides this one cookie cutter thing that's supposed to respond to this. And my hero of restorative justice in that creative sense is a man named Hank Shea, who now teaches at the Halloran Center at University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis. But he had a legendary career as a feared federal prosecutor convicting people who were accused of public corruption and white-collar crime. So the people that would sell out and, you know, rake money off the top in these corrupt contracts. And one of those contracts was, I think it had to do with construction of roads. And so his solution was, we're not just going to say, okay, you're going to go to jail for X amount of time. It also involved paying an enormous fine of, I think, millions of dollars. And he figured out what are all the things in the communities that are covered by these roads, attached by these roads, that need something. Well, the senior center needs a new roof, and the fire department needs a new truck, and the school needs some new textbooks. And it was kind of done that way in this really creative way of trying to heal the community, atone for the wrong. And then the other thing he does is that when those guys are in prison, he has them come out and speak to his law school classes and to business school classes if there was a white collar crime, to talk about ethics and to say, you know, cautionary tale, don't do what I did, so that that person has a chance to do something useful for the community besides just, you know, sit in a cell.
That's wonderful, but I'm going to play the devil's advocate here only because you shared your caseload with me earlier this week. And so how do you, if you're swamped in the day-to-day with billable hours coming at you and so forth, where do we have spaces where we can be creative? Are we creating those spaces within our sandbox where we take time out to bring that creativity when we at the same time are expected to get the job done? Does that make sense, my question, in terms of, are there safe spaces right now within the legal sector that allows for this creative thinking to happen, for this effeminate wisdom to kick into play?
And Ayana, you sent me an article on the holistic public defenders. Maybe you could speak to that a little.
Yes, so I actually just learned, I didn't even know that it was a thing until I went to a job fair in February, and there was a woman there who was from they just opened up a Detroit office, and basically the idea is that people commit crimes usually because of societal issues, right? So like poverty plays a huge role in the reason why people are committing crimes, doing certain things. Like it's not, most of the time it's not just because people want to commit crimes or want to be, a crime doer. There's usually other things that go along with it. And so the idea of holistic public defense is essentially that, first of all, the public defender's office is within the community. It's not in a courthouse, far away from where a lot of the people who need the defense are located. So it's in the actual neighborhood, and they provide more than just legal help. So there's also social workers that are in the office, counselors, people who can help you do things like apply for food stamps or housing or other things that can help make it so you don't have to commit crime again or end up in that position again. And so I think that's also a part of restorative justice, is also helping to correct the wrongs in the system that we currently have, and kind of ensure that we're acknowledging where the pitfalls are and acknowledging where, there's opportunity for people to be taken advantage of or exploited or not given the resources that they need. Acknowledging that and then working to rectify that, right? Because, and making sure that people have adequate resources and their basic needs met, we ensure that, people can do and focus on this healing and working on themselves and being better human beings for the community, and also empowering the community and allowing the community to make choices about certain things that go on in their communities, right? So there's a big move right now to defund police departments and instead put that funding into communities. And I think it's been proven time and time again that communities are best at dealing with certain things that go on in their communities because they live there and they know the people within their communities and they know how things operate. And they're not a stranger. They're not somebody who's just assigned to that neighborhood for, a certain period of time. And so I think part of restorative justice is empowering communities and making sure that communities have the resources they need. So the healing doesn't just have to happen in that moment of something happened. It can be, a continuous healing because people are traumatized so often throughout life, and it's very rare that you get a moment like what Tom and Jeannie have described where you're able to do that healing, and I think when we start implementing community resources and encouraging communities to take on that responsibility, then we'll also be encouraging people to continue this healing path and to do restorative justice on their own, right? Like it doesn't just have to be lawyers who are participating in restorative justice. It can be something that everyone participates in and is a part of. So
I love the conversation on Facebook. There's a really good question. I love the idea of restorative justice, but how does it interact with the victim, particularly in crimes that are more serious? When a person has been victimized seriously, how can restoration happen? I think that's a good question. Anybody have thoughts there?
Yeah, and let me make one little comment on how do you put it into practice. One thing I do is anytime I'm in a litigation with an attorney, I'll invite the other attorney out for coffee when it's done. just kind of a very small step. And one other thing that was really profound for me was I had a client one time who had cancer that returned, and I'm come from the Christian tradition and Catholic, and I knew about some Passionist priests who have a healing service, and I remember just thinking, I cannot say anything to him about this. This is not my role. This is not my place. But I went ahead and did it anyway, just to kind of unburden myself. And it ended up that weekend, one of the priest who leads the healing service stepped in at his parish, and he did a healing for him. And it was really a profound experience for my client. And, at that point I learned that the law in business often wants to reduce somebody to one characteristic. And really, I think, healing for all of us requires that we see the wholeness of all of us and the essence of all of us. But Judge, to your question on restorative justice, and I should have said that because restorative justice is a victim-centered process. Louisville modeled its program after New Zealand, who used restorative justice for every case but homicide. But in cases of serious crime, if the victim was unwilling to participate or unable for whatever reason, they could have surrogate victims step in. But again, the whole idea of restorative justice is that you would never re-victimize the victim. It's described as a victim-centered process because the traditional justice system doesn't often have an ability to give a voice to the victim, and the victim's voice is central to restorative justice. And I think, just back on the role of lawyers, being Christian and this being an IPP conversation, I can roll it in, but I've told people that, I've got an opportunity to do Christianity 501 because I've got all kinds of baked in enemies. If the highest calling is to love your enemies and bless those that persecute you, I've got potentially a slew of enemies every day that I can work with. So I think, part of it is just seeing I think Richard Rohr or somebody always says, God comes disguised as your life, and seeing that anything that comes forward in your life is your opportunity to grow.
Can I jump in with a quick illustration of where there was a victim, something that's very healing for a victim of a violent crime? So this is again from the woman who had the Restorative Justice Office in New York. And there was a man who had 2 daughters, and he was robbed at gunpoint, an absolutely terrifying, violent crime where he thought he was going to lose his life. And the perpetrator was arrested. And instead of another extra 5 years tacked on to the prison sentence, what the victim wanted was to sit down with this young man who'd robbed him and pointed that gun in his face and bring along his 2 daughters. And he did. He sat down with the perpetrator, with the daughters, and he said, you see these 2 girls? They're what I thought of when you pointed that gun at me. When I thought that they would grow up without a father, no one there to cheer at their basketball games, no one there to be at their high school graduation or to walk them down the aisle when they got married. That's what I saw flash before me. All of that heartbreak and pain and loss when you pointed that gun at me. And he said that it was an absolutely harrowing thing for this perpetrator to hear. And you could tell that he was absolutely stricken in a way that another 5 years in prison would not have taught him. And it was empowering for the victim, because when you are the victim of a crime and have a gun pointed at you, you feel helpless and powerless. And instead, he had the power in that interaction of making this person see what he hadn't seen before.
Jeannie, I'm going to throw this right back at you because we share something in common in terms of a family member who has been murdered, and that was my mom. And I remember, and this was 17 years ago, she was murdered in her home by 2 young men, 17 years old, right from the neighborhood. The point I'm wanting to make, though, is for me, the healing happened when we had our day in court. A big part of the healing happened when we had our day in court, when I could look at who the persons were who perpetrated the crime, and there was a minute or so, time stood still for me, but when I made eye contact with the person who struck the killing blow, and he looked at me, that was, I could say more in those words. I could see that he heard every single thing that I felt without a word. And a big part of that was the day in court. I don't know if my healing would have happened at the rate it did if I was denied that one moment, right? So this brings me to this whole truth and reconciliation. Again, I'm from South Africa, grew up during the apartheid era, and there was this Truth and Reconciliation Committee that allowed for healing to happen on a bigger scale. So you've gone through the same experience, and in your personal experience, I'd like to know, of course, you wrote a book, right? So there was a lot of healing in just writing it, putting words to it. But for you, what was yours and your family's experience through that time?
Oh, well, first, I have to say I'm so very sorry for your loss. It's a horrendous loss to have lost your mother. And I'm so devastated to hear that, and so glad that the perpetrators were arrested and that they stood trial, and that one of the things they had to confront, because a trial is being publicly confronted with your wrongdoing, that as part of that, they also had to be confronted by you, by the fact that this woman wasn't this nameless, faceless, blot in the universe, that this was someone who was dearly loved and deeply needed by you and all the rest of your family. And by you looking at that person in the eyes, I hope that was part of what would help to heal that person who did it, to convict him of his responsibility for all the pain that he caused when he did that.
I'm sure, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm sure he saw the consequence on my family's faces, right, in that moment.
Yeah.
But what I saw was this young 17-year-old boy who did something really, really, really dumb, right? So there was that moment of resonance where I could see the human part of this bag of skin, and he could see the hurt that one dumb act. And there may have been dumb acts before, but this dumb act. And so there was that moment, and there's something to be said, I think, about creating a space for that restorative healing to begin, right? To begin. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but go ahead.
No, I'm thinking of my friend Steve Young, who had twin boys. They were teenagers, and one of them was sitting in a car outside of a 7-Eleven, and some guy came up to him who was ordered to do a killing as part of a gang initiation, didn't know him from Adam, pulled out a gun and shot him in the head. And the most harrowing thing I've ever seen is the tape from the EKG from the hospital that his family saved, showing the line going up and down with the heartbeat, and then the flat line where his life ended. That was his son's heart ceasing to beat. It turned out that the perpetrator was a member of the same church in the same community. And the priest from that Catholic church said, this man is devastated by what he did. His family is devastated. Are you willing to meet with him? And my friend Steve went to that prison. It was a kid about the same age as his son who had died. And the young man was so ashamed that he couldn't look him in the eye. He couldn't even raise his head from the table. And Steve said to the young man, "Look at me. Look at me." He said, "You know why I've come. I have come to forgive you. And I have lost my son because of you. And now you are my son. And I expect for and dream of for you everything I dreamed of for him. That you will pay for this wrong. That you will never do anything like this again. That you will go to school. That you will get a job. That you will become a part of the community. That's the only justice you can give me. You can't give me my son back. but you can give me that. And you know what? That's exactly what happened. That's the way to heal.
Gosh, that's big and so simple, but big. Tom, what's coming up for you?
Cheers. Yeah, it's a beautiful story. Thank you, Jeannie.
I've got a question. So if we as a community want to join you in reimagining, we've been talking a lot about moral imagination on these programs, that there is this creative reimagining of our community and these basic assumptions that we don't think are serving us anymore. And I think restorative justice is that moral imagination that we could live in a different way. We could create a different system. If we want to join you in that as citizens, where are the fulcrum points that we can really look at to make those kind of systemic changes? What's going to have to get reoriented? And how do we as a community join you in that, right? Because it's not just it's all of us that are responsible for restorative justice. Yeah. And so how can we as a community join in that work, both in our policy making and the way in which we choose to engage ourselves? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can. So Volunteers of America, as I mentioned before, has kind of taken on the mantle of and created a division for restorative justice within its organization. And, they're in the process of lobbying for more restorative justice in the juvenile and adult courts in Kentucky. On a more immediate basis, this article that I wrote that wasn't published, I think Jeannie and Ayana and I are going to kind of add all of our voices to it and try to get it published in the American Bar Association Journal. And Ayana's feels a calling around this, so she's probably better at social media than I am, so she may get some kind of conversation running with it. What we found with restorative justice in Louisville, at least, and may be true in Chicago, is that even lawyers don't know about it. People who've been practicing law for a number of years have misconceptions about it, or maybe don't fully understand it. But what we've also learned is that if anybody will take time to sit down and listen to it, it's not a political it's not a political process. The right side of the political aisle in this country can like it for certain reasons, and the left side of the aisle can like it for different reasons, and they both can like it because I think it's a third way. So I think, to answer your question, Judd, and I'm sure Jeannie and Ayana may have other ideas, is if people could learn about it and connect up with the Volunteers of America. They train people to facilitate these conferences. So if you want to be a trained peacemaker, they will give free training from time to time, and they help teach volunteers how to do it. And I think, and just talk about it.
And, everyone can encourage their legislators to do the law reform that really needs to be done in order to make these things possible, to set up restorative justice courts. Right now in Chicago, there's this Catholic Lawyers Guild that has a restorative justice committee, and we're struggling to get a privilege in for these conversations, because one of the reasons people are afraid to engage in restorative justice is that something that you say in the course of restorative justice might be used against you later on if you go to trial, if you end up not being able to reach a resolution. Whereas if there's a privilege, then people can feel free to say the truth in confidence in these kind of discussions. So that's just a small example of all the different ways we need to change this hidebound, rigid way that we've been doing the law to allow for more breathing space for this kind of work. But I'd love to hear what Ayana has to say about, because you really are the future.
Yeah, I think it's all of those things. I also think an important aspect of all of this is people doing the inner work within themselves. I think that when you begin to heal yourself and you begin to really question who you are truly, and kind of get out of the egoic mindset, you start to realize that you know, there's not much difference between you and another human being, that we all are essentially part of the universe and make up the universe. And I think that's all essential in doing this work, because until you start to recognize those things, and you stop isolating and separating yourself from others, you're able to give and to do for others abundantly. And you're also able to see that, you know, you're not superior to others, and you're not better than others. And you know, you see that. So in A New Earth, Eckhart Tolle gives an example of he was on a bus to his university, and there was a woman who was angrily arguing with herself, and he remembered thinking like, oh man, she's crazy, like that would never be me. And then they get off at the same stop at the university, and he realizes that she's a professor. And so he starts to question you know, his original thought process of that could never be me. He kind of realized that, you know, anything is possible. Any of us can be in situations where we make really bad decisions and hurt and harm others. And you know, in realizing that, I feel like it's easier for us to forgive others and to be accepting of others, and to help people on this path of healing and restorative justice. So I think that's something that's really small, but something that is accessible to everybody. Just kind of, you know, questioning everything that, you know, we've all kind of been led to believe about certain things, and our beliefs, and you know, just really realizing who we are and our place in the universe, and you know, doing that inner healing and pushing ourselves towards being the best that we can be.
Thank you, Ayana. I would be not happy with myself if I didn't plug a group that's here local in Louisville that I just came to know about on one of Judd's interviews on the evolutionary series. It's called the Bail Project. And what they do is they just bail folks out. But in terms of supporting that person while they are out on bail, so that they can appear in court when they need to, until the case is settled, and then that bail money goes back into the bucket, which is a sustainable source to keep doing what they do. But in addition to your earlier point, Ayana, was how can communities plug in? You know, how can we support this bigger process? How can we play our little link in the chain? And it's supporting those local groups like the Bail Project that helps those individuals during the whole legal process. And then also, because it's never just the crime, there's always a backstory. There's always something that got them to that place of, right, of bad choices. But yeah, so I wanted to highlight the Bail Project on that. And then to Jeannie's earlier point, going back to the Truth and Reconciliation, they did have an amnesty arm, or an amnesty committee, to allow for that space where a perpetrator won't feel too threatened in presenting themselves for that reconciliation, restorative process. So there's lots to be talked about here, and there's so many different angles to all of this, right? But I do believe, to Judd's question, that we all can play a part somehow, even if it is supporting, right, the Bail Project locally, knowing that we're helping the bigger picture.
That's so right. Can I just say, as a public defender, one of the most heartbreaking things I ever experience is when I have a client who is a young man, because most of my clients, because of the inequities that we are all grasping now, most of my clients happen to be young men of color because of the way our communities are policed and all these things that you know, we're learning about. that cause these kind of inequities. And my most heartbreaking thing is when my client's been arrested and the bail's been set too high for him to post. And so even though he's innocent and he has no criminal record, and I'm begging him to go to trial, I can win this case. He said, Ms. Bishop, I've got a family. I need to get home. They need my money, for the job I'm making. I'm going to plead guilty. And I'll beg them not to do it, and they'll plead guilty and give themselves that, that felony conviction that's going to hurt them the rest of their life because they couldn't post the bail. And so a bail fund is transformational in making sure that those kind of injustices don't happen.
I want to.
And Jeannie.
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Jeannie, have I heard that they've let more people out on bail, and they found that that's not really the issue they thought it was? That really your own recognizance is something that tends to work fine.
Yeah, the notion was if you were letting all these people charged with crimes out on bail, that this crime rate's going to skyrocket. It hasn't. It's absolutely unchanged. I mean, there is more, unfortunately, more just in the city of Chicago for other reasons, not having to do with bail. It's really having to do with gang activity. There's unfortunately been a rise in shootings here, but just the ordinary kind of crime that I usually handle as a public defender, burglaries, robberies, drugs, stuff like that, it has not gone up just because we've let people remain in their communities while they're fighting their case.
I have one more question that I'm going to throw out to our panelists, and then we're going to open it up to questions that we've been receiving. I know there's a couple on the chat box here. So to Ayana's point with regards to you can't be a healer if you are broken, is what I'm hearing, right? So that internal work. When we spoke earlier this week, Jeannie shared a beautiful story. Jeannie, I was hoping you could share that with us again, where your client, you were going off and you had your own agenda in your head, and the client just needed you to hear him. So if you don't mind, because I think that's a very powerful illustration of being grounded and present and hold yourself before you can serve your client 100%, right?
Absolutely.
So if you don't mind.
Yeah. He was charged with a residential burglary. He was in custody. I went to see him at the county jail, and I had my whole agenda in my head of what I wanted to talk about and what I needed to go over. And I sat down and shuffled my papers and said, okay, here's the first thing I want to talk about. And he cut me off and he said, listen to me. He said, no one ever just listens to me. And I was kind of taken aback, and I said, fine, please go ahead. I won't say a word. You talk. He talked for an hour and a half, nonstop. And he didn't even take a breath between sentences in that hour and a half, because I could tell he was a man who was used to being cut off in mid-sentence as soon as he did pause for a breath. And he talked about his hopes and dreams for his only child, a son that he had named after himself, Junior. The goals that he had that he had totally failed to achieve, the disappointment he thought his family would feel, all of this heartbreak that was leading to the decisions that he had made and was making. And it was such a lesson to me that part of how I can be healing is not just, again, to be like, I am the advocate for you and I'm going to fight for you, but I am to stand side by side with you and share in your journey and listen to you and understand not just what you did, but who you are.
Beautiful. I love that. I know there's a couple of questions.
I would,
Go ahead.
Teresa, would you mind, you're on the Zoom call, would you mind, I'm just really interested in what you're thinking as a law student. Like, do you mind unmuting and just, what are you thinking? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I had a similar experience with Ayana. Like, I went to law school thinking I was going to help people and do all this healing work. Like, I was in between law school and yoga training. So those are like complete opposites. And I was disillusioned, but I'm so glad that I found this like events. I follow IPP just because I like philosophically, and I've been through my own spiritual journey since college, and I wanted to find a space that allowed me to do that work. And that I'm just really happy that people share this idea, and I love the concept of healing, because my own healing was so powerful that I think that everyone deserves it, including like perpetrators, victims, everyone involved. And right now I'm working in family court, and I hear a lot about like the dependency and neglect and abuse cases. I see those cases as really powerful in the way that if you allow healing for these kids, they can grow up to be different people. And I'm just really thankful that you guys share the same vision for healing a community.
All right, we're starting something here, Tom. Just reach out to Tom Williams. Tom, you're spurring this up for us, Tom, and we're going to build you an army of love to get this done. We're all behind you. So, Al, I'm going to go it your way, because you had a question on the chat box. Would you mind asking it for us, please?
Well, it's pretty long and convoluted, and I guess when I listen to the conversations, and I'm by no means legal friendly or knowledgeable, but it sure seems like the nature of the beast is competition, you know, win or lose, and that metric is kind of what persists, and it also seems like we're not asking the right questions sometimes. You know, should the question of justice be winning and losing, or should it be what's in the best interest of the community? And then when you start drilling down a little bit further, it seems like I hear, wow, people, the ones that are the first time offenders, right? Once they get a rap, their journey from then on goes all downhill. So if you were to find the right pivot point, you know, to really make the bigger impact in terms of a community, and what you might be able to do to reduce second-time offenders, you know, it sure seems like the prosecutors have to be as much a part of this solution as anyone, and their goal shouldn't necessarily be just to win. So, and when I hear about restorative justice, I'm just wondering whether or not prosecutors view that as a viable option in terms of how they go about determining what's in the best interest of the community.
Well, you know, there's two things that I was thinking of as you were speaking, because it's such a great point that you're raising. Here in Chicago, for misdemeanors, we have a opportunity for, if everybody agrees, the victim and the perpetrator and the state and defense, to have it go to mediation. And if they can't work it out in mediation, then it'll, you know, go back into court as a court case. And it's often a dispute between neighbors over, you know, who cut somebody's shrubs, you know, by accident or something like that, where if you just sit down and talk with the mediator, you can resolve the dispute. The other thing is that idea of how do we divert it out so that that young person doesn't get that first conviction, that first X on their back. And that's where, you know, again, we see some inequities. In my rich public school district in the community I live on the North Shore of Chicago, we have something called a peer jury, where if you're a juvenile and you do some crime, instead of getting arrested by the police and going into the system and having your fate adjudicated by a court, you can go before a panel of your peers, kids your age. You can do some restitution, you can do some community service, and your case doesn't ever even go to court, and you're not in jeopardy of getting that first fate. There should be things like that in every community in my city. There isn't. And that kind of diversion, especially for the first-time offenders, is one of the reforms we need to have.
Yeah, and I think in Kentucky, I don't think I'm out of school in saying this, but one of volunteers of America's legislative agenda is to make restorative justice the default process for juvenile cases in the state. So the idea would be that, you know, it's not in court, it's this process that's followed with the people involved. And so unless there's an opt-out for a specific reason, you know, all of the juvenile cases in Kentucky will be restorative justice cases. And you know, instead of creating kind of these vicious cycles of one bad act leading to another, you know, can arrest that and create, you know, virtuous cycles where, you know, one example of accountability leads to a recognition of personal empowerment and resilience and an ability to, you know, be a productive member of the community. The leader who came from New Zealand, I mean, he came, I guess, 2009, and I spent my whole time crying because of just the beautiful stories that were told. But they really, he talked about some of the offenders really just often didn't have good support networks around them, and didn't kind of have a sacred no. And when they got that no and learned about their personal power to, you know, we all make mistakes, but the idea that you can make things right, it was really profound for that country, so much so that they closed juvenile detention centers and reduced recidivism by 2/3. And so, you know, Judge, you asked what can they do? I mean, I would love for people to talk to their elected officials and say, we'd like restorative justice as the default. We want restorative justice as the juvenile system in the state. And then, you know, it's already starting to get into the adult system, but we think we can, you know, no one really argues about kids having this opportunity.
I want to, Ayana, you shared something about, and Tom, you mentioned this too, when a lawyer, an individual lawyer, feels dichotomized by the system and their own moral, human need to be healers. Where are those moments? Where are those pressure points where lawyers don't feel like they can fulfill this image or these legal, like, I'm not always clear where a lawyer gets into their own moral bind between who they want to be, who they feel they are, and what the system is asking of them. It feels like that's a place we could come alongside lawyers to work. So yeah, I'm interested in those places where you feel like you have to get dichotomized between who you feel like we ought to be and what you're being asked to do. There are more stories about that? That was helpful, Tom, when you just said, oh, I shouldn't share that there's a healing service. Well, you know, why not? I mean, right? Because is that the professionalization of the lawyer role that's keeping you from being a human first, or a caregiver, or yeah.
Well, and I can say, you know, after almost 30 years of practicing, it's a lot less of an issue for me now because I'm an owner in the firm and I can pretty much pick what I want to do. And I've, you know, I help the city with the compassion effort, and clients, if they want a lawyer that's going to devastate their opponent, they don't pick the lawyer that's associated with the compassion effort. So a lot of my clients kind of self-select. And so people who think like me, I have the opportunity to work with people who think like me. But when I was an associate, I often worked for partners in my old firm that didn't want to do things the way I wanted to do them. They, you know, they would want to be really aggressive. I mean, and I've had a client one time tell me that, you know, I explained that if we did X, Y, and Z, we're going to bankrupt this person. And the client said to me, he was in the healthcare setting, he said, I'm going to bankrupt them. And I was a little bit of a jerk. And I said, now, which industry are you in again? You're in the wellness industry. And we want to, but just because of my own survival instincts, when I was younger, I often just kind of did what was expected as opposed to doing, you know, feeling empowered to say no and feeling, you know, the ability to be more wholly myself. And that's been, you know, my own healing journey that's taken a long time. So I don't, you know, and it's interesting, often the lawyers I'll get complaints that people say I'm not a zealous advocate because I don't try to devastate my opponent all the time. And that means I'm not ethical. I mean, I've been accused of being unethical. And to me, it's just people who who accept a very small role for an advisor. You know, if I'm a litigator, the only thing I can be is charged to devastate the opponent, instead of explaining to the client that, you know, we can do this, but it'll cost you this, and they won't like you, and they'll talk badly about you in the community, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I spend a lot of time reframing situations now so clients can see the bigger picture. And thankfully, doing the right thing is usually really good for business. I mean, it's good for business. The businesses I work with who treat people terribly because they can or because they think that's aggressive often go out of business. I mean, I think the world is changing in that regard in a much better way.
I'd love to hear the others of you reflect on that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that I worry about, especially the fact that I'm going to be entering into the legal profession as a Black woman, and navigating a space that, you know, isn't always representative of people who look like me, you know, and trying to build my career and be successful, while at the same time not, you know, letting go of what I believe in and what, you know, the role that I feel like lawyers should play, is definitely something that I'm, you know, stressing about currently. But I don't know. I think like Tom said, you know, when you do the right thing, it ends up, you know, resulting in something good. I feel like everything happens as it's supposed to. And so I'd like to think that, you know, 2 years from now, when I'm accepting a position at a firm, or, you know, with a nonprofit or within the government, that, you know, I'll be choosing a space where I don't have to let go of the things that I believe in, and I'll be choosing a space that is willing to listen to, you know, what I have to say and what I have to add, and kind of get behind what I feel like our society is moving towards anyways. Like, I feel like the things that we're discussing today are just the logical next step in our evolution as a society and as a country. You know, and I'm kind of banking on in 2 years we'll be further into that. But I think it's something that I stress about, and I'm sure Teresa also probably thinks about, just because of how traditionally the legal profession is and how it kind of works. Yeah.
Something that's opening up for me as I'm listening to this conversation, it reminds me a lot of conversations we've had recently about just the corporate world and our world in general, where we talk about the sacred feminine energy is starting to be rebalanced, and that the world, our political system, our justice system, all of these areas are so, they're so unbalanced with not with just feminine masculine, but with unhealthy masculine and feminine energy versus healthy and balanced feminine masculine energy. You know, some of the traits of unbalanced masculine energy, what we see in our world today, you know, cruelty, disconnected from emotions, the unjustifies the means, stubborn, headstrong, you know, not willing to change. And so it's so encouraging to see Ayana and Teresa and Jeannie, but especially these young girls that are just now coming into the legal, sorry, not girls, but young women that are coming into this legal world, that are really going to bring about some real change, and to help awaken that feminine energy in women and awaken it in men, so that we know that, you know, these ideas of compassion and love and all of these beautiful beautiful things that are out there are available to this world as well in the legal profession. So thank you for that. And Tom, you alluded to that sacred feminine earlier, but these are discussions that we've been having, and I think that that's universal. I think that that energy needs to wake up in all of our systems, but especially in this legal system.
I love that you said that, because, you know, at least when I started out as a trial lawyer a long time ago, it was mostly a male-dominated profession, and my image of a trial lawyer was a kind of a broad-shouldered, swaggering kind of football player, like, you know, guy with a suit and tie. And when I did my first jury trial, it happened to be a murder trial. I was second cheering, but I had a lot of responsibilities for making arguments and doing examinations of witnesses. And so I was kind of panicking, like, I don't meet that ideal of the swaggering, barrel-chested, deep-voiced, you know, guy. And I consulted the best female trial lawyer I know, Mary Pike, who's now retired and living in New York City. And she said, Jean, if you go in front of a jury and try to be something that you're not, the insincerity will just, you know, reek, and no one will listen or to or believe a word you say. If you're a quiet, soft-spoken person, be that. Go right up to the jury box, look them in the eye, and say what you believe. And that's what I did. And it was so great to get that good advice early on, is to bring exactly who you are and all of your truth of who you are and your wholeness and your integrity to your practice of law.
Beautiful stuff. People, we're running out of time. I know we can go for another hour, but we do not have that time, which means we've just got to keep this conversation going into the future. As a personal and professional career coach, I also say, regardless of age, regardless of who I'm speaking to, that if you can't practice whatever it is you do in good conscience, you by default create the separation within you. So you can play the role out here, you can say what is expected of you, but the moment you do so and you are not connected or vested in that decision, you've created the separation within yourself that is not going to be serving you. You do that time and again, and you start forgetting who you really are, right? So yes, we can talk in terms of the legal sector, in corporate world, and all of these different workspaces, but it comes down to exactly what Jean said was, you know, just show up with all of who you are, the good, bad, and the ugly, because that's what makes the blueprint of you, right? Mm-hmm. So we have 5 to 7 minutes remaining. I'm going to have every check out with last comments and remarks.
And why don't we open it up?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, why don't we open it up to everybody that's been on the Zoom? I would love to hear. We've got a couple of people, you know, a checkout is kind of a chance to harvest what's been showing up for you in a few sentences. So it's not a long, but I would love Patrick and Patrice, and why don't we just do a big group Zoom checkout in a 30 seconds. What are you hearing? What are you feeling? What's been really meaningful for you? Patrick, would you be willing to check out with us?
Yes, I'm here on my phone, so I'm having a little trouble
sharing you
my face, but there's my picture. Yeah, for me, I'm a law student as well, and just one of the things I've been trying to do as someone who comes from a position where I have family in the legal profession, and I have an amount of privilege myself, just to listen and to hear, what I can do to change the system, how I can be active in the political process. And that's what something like this has helped me with, just to see, where other people's experiences are coming from and the kind of things that they desire to learn more about it. Someone mentioned that this doesn't have to be a split left-right political issue, and I completely agree. I come from a more conservative direction, and many of my friends are as well, but I guess I just hope to be able to influence them that this isn't something that has to be a split, that this is something that, you know, all Americans, we can collaborate on, and we can work to fixing this.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Patrick. Patrice, you want to check out? Would you be willing to check out and unmute yourself? And if not, Al, would you be willing to go? And then Malka, and then Sarah?
Yeah, I've been a Tom Williams fan since the get-go, and I can still remember the first time I met him, and he was a lawyer, and I didn't like him. And but everything that he's ever done for restorative justice, and all of the tension he feels ethically in terms of doing the right thing, he's just so wonderfully transparent and gifted that it creates this wonderful pool of opportunities. I just wish he could throw a bucket of gasoline on the whole thing and just make it happen. But the journey's been going on for so long, and he makes little incremental gains every time, and every time I turn around, I'm just more and more optimistic. So thank you for everything, Tom.
Great, thanks, Malka, and then Sarah.
Judd, can you hear me? It's Patrice.
Oh yes, Patrice, I hear you now. If you
I was driving and I just got to my destination.
Oh, well, great.
So, anyway, I couldn't figure out how to unmute on my cell phone. But I heard, Tom, I heard you speak at a Earth Spirit dinner several years ago. And it just blew my mind that we're doing this restorative justice. And I have a lifelong interest in South Africa for various reasons, and the whole truth and reconciliation. And those two concepts just have been playing over and over in my mind, with the divide that has been deepening and voicing itself in our nation and in our city. And my question, when I heard you, Tom, and my question for Jeannie in her work at Cook County, I'm a Chicago transplant, and that was always a very scary place in our mindsets, is, are we able to apply this to adult justice, restorative justice to adults? Is that coming? Are there space for that in either of your practices and experiences?
Thanks, Patrice. We actually have one. Yeah, we have 1 minute left.
Breonna Taylor, we need to bring it to everything.
Yeah, thanks, Patrice. We have 1 minute left. So Tom and Jean, if y'all could briefly hit that on your checkout. Malka, could you do a checkout? And Sarah?
Sure. I loved this discussion. Thank you for letting me listen to it. And I just wanted to say that, you know, I've heard Tom talk about the importance of doing the inner work. It was great to hear Ayana and Jeannie and Teresa talk about it as well. And I just want to say that the inner work of, you know, understanding that we live in a diverse society, and we should understand other people as well as we try to understand ourselves, is important. But it's not only just important for figuring out how to apply it to your own work, but just being the kind of person you are, the kind of people you are, has an effect on others. It does. And so this discussion really had an effect on me. Thank you.
Thank you, Malka. And then Sarah, and then Tom.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for each of the panelists and all the participants in the call. This has been a beautiful conversation, and one that's so desperately needed. I am so encouraged by this conversation. And to Ayana and Teresa, go, make change, do what it takes, find other people that think like you and really make some big change. You know, with Tom and with Jeannie, find your mentors, and let's do it, guys. We got to change the world.
Woo-hoo. Thanks, Sarah. Tom, and then Teresa.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great. To answer the question, yes, it can be applied to adults, and it's being looked at. And then Sarah, you'll be happy to know that Jefferson County has a lot of female judges, and women tend to win judicial races in Jefferson County. So I think that's a good sign and a good development. But this has been marvelous. Thanks to Ida and Sarah and Judd and Jeannie and Ayana. It's been fun. Thank you.
Teresa, and then Jean.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. I'm so inspired to begin my second year of law school. I'm definitely going to be reaching out to Jeannie, Tom, and Ayana. I'm so happy to have met everyone and heard your stories. Thank you.
Great. Jean, thanks for being with us. Can you mind checking out? And then Ayana, we'll give you the final word there.
Yeah, I just am so moved by everything I've heard. I'm so hopeful for the future when I look at these two amazing young women that are going to join the profession. And I agree. Go, you go. We only have a restorative justice court now for juveniles in Chicago, but I absolutely see that expanding in the future. It makes sense in every way. And so I am just brimming with hope.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being with us. Ayana?
Yeah, I kind of want to second everything that everyone else has been saying. This has been an incredible conversation, and something that I feel as though I really needed. There's a reason why I was here today and that I was able to join in on this conversation. And I just want to, remind everyone that we all play a part in this, and creating a better society and a better place for all human beings is something that we can all take part in. And I just encourage everybody to spread the word, do the inner work, and continue the fight for a better society and a better world.
Thank you. Ida, you want to close it?
Thank you, Judd. Let me say again, this has been one of those Wednesdays where I walk away feeling really good about doing the work we're doing on Boardroom Buddhas. I know that if we didn't do and follow our passion to create these spaces, which it is, it's a passion of mine to create dialogue, right? Spaces for dialogue to happen. Today was great. Thank you so much. We are going to be sharing this recording again and again, I feel. I'm certainly going to do so with my friends and networks. Thank you all very much. Ayana, Teresa, we're looking forward to the two rock stars on this show today. Tom and Jeannie, gosh, thank you for doing you, because without you, the baton can't be passed and we can't affect, right? So again, a deep felt thank you. To everyone who's listened in today, thank you for being here. I hope you found some value and a takeaway. If you do have any suggestions for topics that we should bring to the table here at Boardroom Buddha, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. It could be about anything, about any spaces. If it's relevant and you feel it's important and your heart speaks to you, reach out to Judd, Sarah, or myself, and we'll certainly try and make it happen. That's all from me today. Judd, you want to just give us an
again, just echo all the wonderful things that Ida said, and yeah, appreciate of you all putting this wonderful program together. And thanks for joining us on Facebook. Every 3 o'clock every day we have great programs, and again, remember at 9 o'clock in the morning we do interfaith devotionals from different religious traditions here in Louisville. So join us for that inner work, which we are echoing is so important in this transformative community work. It starts with our own inner transformation. So thanks for being with us. Also want to remind you, we are doing an $18 campaign to help support IPP Online. We're encouraging people, I put that in the Facebook chat, and you're welcome to go on our webpage and click on supporting IPP Online for the $18 a month. Just for the price of a meal, you can help these wonderful programs continue. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock, we're having a conversation on building Black wealth, why that's so important. All of these equity questions come down to a lot about how do we build Black wealth to create a more equitable society. So I hope you'll join us in that conversation tomorrow. And then we've got a great conversation at 3 o'clock on Friday called The Enneagram and Money with Carrie Van Winkle. So we're going to be looking at how different Enneagram numbers relate to money. And that's one of the most difficult topics that creates unpeace in families and couples. And so we'll be giving us some ways to understand why your friend or partner or kid spends money in a way that you don't like. So come and join us, and we'll have compassion for each other and how we spend and relate to money. Thank you all so much for being with us. Blessings to you, and may we all look at creating a restorative justice community. Thank you. Peace.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye, you all. Thank you.
Thank you.